Very good afternoon to everyone signing in. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes till everybody signs in, and then we'll kick it off. Very warm welcome to everyone, and good afternoon to everyone signing in. We're just going to give it a couple more seconds to a minute to let everyone filter in, and then we will kick off the webinar. Very good afternoon to everyone joining us today. My name is Mohammed Al Musa, and I am the program manager leading the Governance in Family Firms program, as well as the Governance in Tech program here at the Pearl Initiative. It is my honor and privilege to welcome you to today's webinar on the what, why, and how of family constitutions. We would like to thank our partners in today's discussion, EY, as well as our esteemed speaker, Yasmine Omari, who is a director at EY Private. This webinar follows on from last week's session that delved into the new family business law in the UAE, presented by Fadi Hamada, General Counsel at Al Fatim, as well as today's speaker, Yasmine Omari. Before we launch into our discussion, I'd like to first start by introducing the Pearl Initiative. We are the Gulf region's business-led nonprofit organization set up by Gulf regional business leaders and the United Nations Office for Partnership in 2010 to support the growth of corporate governance, stewardship, transparency, and accountability in the private sector. We would like to play a short video showcasing the Pearl Initiative and what we do.
Connecting leaders from across all sectors to address these very challenges, we aim to collectively design self-renewing models of collaborative governance that will ensure the vitality of the region's economies and societies for generations to come.
The youth are the future workforce. They are the future leaders for the businesses that fuel the growth of the region.
It is a privilege to be working with the Pearl Initiative in promoting higher governance standards, something for which there is a clear regional need for.
For our businesses, for our community, the more we engage the youth, the students at universities, the youth in their businesses, entrepreneurs, that is the area I think we should focus going forward.
You know, the Pearl Initiative started at a time where there was very little information about governance and very little even direction towards governance. And in the past 10 years, this has changed. The momentum is growing daily. And I would just say we need to continue what we're doing. We need to increase the way we are showing how transparency can be beneficial.
Thank you to all of our attendees for joining today's discussion. We have a fantastic webinar planned for you today with a wonderful and experienced speaker. It's my absolute honor and privilege to welcome today's speaker, Yasmine Omari, Director at EY Private, whom we thank for generously offering her time. We ask participants to please leave their questions in the Q&A section or the chat, and we will get to them towards the end of the session. Over to you, Yasmine.
Thanks, Mohammed. No pressure. I feel there's big shoes to fill after our session with Fadi last week. But I think it's a well-needed session because there's a lot happening on the legislative front around family constitutions. So the session comes at a pertinent time. Just to reiterate what Mohammed said, I'm Yasmine Omari. I'm a director at EY Private in the Dubai office. But from the Dubai office, we serve the wider MENA region and work with families across the Gulf predominantly and the Levant, supporting them with the institutionalization of their family businesses and also the separation of the family from the business and their formalization of their relationship with the family business and their wealth. It sounds very complex and very technical. Really isn't that complex. Today we'll kind of give you a talk on the role of a family constitution in helping and fulfilling that process. Again, as Mohammed has mentioned, please, if there's any questions, feel free to pop them in the question box and we will try to address those towards the end of the session. Thank you. We can pop to the next slide, Mohammed. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so obviously today's session is the what, how, and why family constitutions. We've got very high-level slides. I'm probably going to be doing a lot of talking at you, but it's just to kind of explain that probably not very technical, but doesn't discount the need and importance of family governance and family constitution. So, you know, there's a lot of information flying about at the moment with the development of the news, with various national agendas, both here in Saudi Arabia and other countries. Sorry, is that better? I'm just getting notes that you can't hear me very well. So yeah, I think that's better. I'm thinking now, Jeff. So yeah, there's been a lot happening with national agendas on the ground regionally in terms of the legal enforceability of family constitutions. All well and good, but you know, what is a family constitution and what does it cover? I think is quite important, and there's a lot of mysteriousness about what that does. So I'm here to kind of go through what the provisions would usually be, what it is that we would cover in a constitution, and how we'd go about putting that in place. So a constitution, you've probably heard of it, family charter, family protocols, Dastur al-Aila, whatever it may be, essentially more or less is the same document. And it aims to regulate the relationship of the family members and the family owners with the business and among each other. As cliche as it sounds, it's about the process and the journey, not necessarily the end product. Probably shouldn't be saying this to you here today, but I'm sure if you Googled it, you can find a few rough templates that would offer you a family constitution. doesn't make us redundant. Let's just be clear on that. But I'm just trying to reiterate the value of the process and the journey. So the purpose of putting in place a family constitution, putting in place the protocols, getting everyone to sign to it, to adhere to it, is to build the family consensus, the family vision, and align the direction that they wish to go towards in the future. So, the document typically would articulate the family's mission, vision, and values in relation to both the family and the business. Now, I'm conscious, I am a legal background, so family values and vision sounds all very fluffy. But when you're dealing with family businesses, there is that innate, inherent familyness, fuzziness that applies no matter how corporate or institutionalized a family business appears to be from the outset or would like to perceive themselves. A vision is important when you're talking about a collective group of family individuals that are all future, potentially owners or future owners in a family business. So, what is it that we're all working towards? Why are we staying in this together? What is our value as a collective group of owners, as opposed to, everyone taking their share and leaving and dismantling the family business? So it's important that you're working to a collective mission, vision, and we all have the same values and ethics, or not exactly the same, but there's a fundamental lowest common denominator in terms of our alignment. So we know how to engage and interact with each other, the family business, and wider society. Second bullet point here is about the establishment of the key decision-making bodies for the family on the business and the rules of the operation. This is critical when we talk about family businesses, because a big issue that prevents the sustainability of family businesses into the future generations is the overlap of family affairs and business affairs. A really silly example, really basic, but if you're going to a family meeting on a Friday, having family lunch, business matters, we don't want it to infringe on our, conversations about how our nephews and nieces are doing, what we're doing as a family, what's going on the family front. And that's why it's important to separate and then build the relevant decision-making platforms, but also communication channels between the family and the business, to make sure that all concerns, all queries, all decisions are channeled through the appropriate channels of communication and directed to the right forums for decision-making. It's particularly important because when we're working with many family businesses in the region, key cause for conflict is not actually any wrongdoing or harmful intentions, but rather it's a perception of. So, and a key issue that we see in that a lot of the time is around communication. Why am I not being included in these discussions? Sorry, I'm going to try with my headset because I'm being told I can't hear very well. Is that better? I hope it is. So a key question usually is around communication. So family members will say, why am I not informed of this? Why am I not involved? Why am I always the last to know? These seem like minor points and minor issues with families, but in reality, these minor issues are big causes for concern and catalysts for conflict in the future that we need to be careful around. We'll elaborate on that point in a bit when I go through the key provisions of the Constitution. Third bullet point is around the roles and responsibilities of key stakeholders. So again, that's clarification of roles, clarification of responsibilities, clarification of your individual authority and capacity. So not only is it giving roles and responsibilities to the relevant stakeholders, be it family members that are on the board, family members that are solely passive shareholders or active shareholders involved in the business or not, defines the rights and responsibilities, but then it also limits certain capacities and responsibilities as well. So ensuring that there's checks and balances in place within the family business, that somebody hasn't essentially got free rein or isn't consulting where necessary, etc. And again, it's a key topic here today because that again is a key cause for conflict in the sense that, you know, so-and-so is doing everything without consulting with the family, without feeding back to us, without getting approvals. We've never held a shareholders assembly meeting. We've never had a board of directors. And that's why it's really important to define those rights and responsibilities. As I've already alluded, the communication channels is also a key issue. And again, I'll elaborate on that when we go through the key provisions today. So in summary, the family constitution is a document that creates certainty around both the family and the business. It ensures everyone knows where they stand. It ensures everyone knows what their roles and responsibilities. It eliminates any room for, you know, interpretation and ambiguities in relation to the family or the business, and eliminates any perceptions that may arise otherwise, whether they're halfly intended or just, you know, an oversight on the part of specific individuals in the family business. We just go to the next slide. So again, the cliche is the journey, not the end document. Journey is critical, and it's important when you're doing the family constitution that you engage the key stakeholders. We often get requests that, you know, we all know what we're doing, we all know what we want, can you just paper it for us? And that in itself is a dangerous situation to be in, because you don't necessarily speak to all of the stakeholders, figure out everyone's individual perspective, their individual points of view, and their individual visions and alignment. You know, it could be under duress or they're coerced to agree to certain things that might not necessarily, they might not be aligned with, agree with, etc. Which is all well and good if they document it in the family constitution. But when we then talk about the implementation and then enforcing the family constitution, if you don't have the alignment from the outset, it's a cause for concern. You know, we can talk about the enforceability of the constitution, but essentially if somebody would want to dispute it and, you know, you have a dissenting family member that would like to drag it out in courts, even if there's no legal case, it can still, you know, go around the courts, and the family can have that cloud over them in the sense that we have got a family member that's not. So it's often useful to have these conversations from the outset. The intention obviously isn't to pick apart the family business and, you know, who wants to leave right now, you know, what are the problems, but, you know, we figure out pain points, sensitivities that are perhaps overlooked. And I can say to you that in 99% of cases when we start this exercise, family members say, this is an easy process for you, and we all agree and we all love each other and it will be very straightforward. I'm not disputing the love within the family, that we don't all agree with each other, but there's always, 99% of the time, a certain sensitivity carried by a given individual or more than one that would need to be addressed while drafting the constitution and putting the provisions in place. Could be a tiny sensitivity, but it gives the opportunity for that issue to grow and then be you know, eventually the volcano will erupt in the family business, which is essentially what we're trying to navigate against and prevent in the family business. So it's important that we engage the whole family, get everyone's point of view, and from that what we do is identify the lowest common denominator. So what do we all as family individuals agree with? Current generation, future generations, because if you're building this family business as the current gen for the next gen, you need to make sure that there's alignment. You're going to pass the baton. Are the next gen capable? Do they even want this? Do they want to be involved in the family business, etc.? And these are key questions to raise. For example, many family businesses today, the patriarch and the founder is building this empire to hand over to the next generation. But in the meantime, the next generation has gone and, you know, built their own dreams and built their own careers and forged their own way in their lives. So coming back to working in family business is potentially not really what they want. So we need to build, define that gap in expectations and build around it, because, you know, if it's that the founder wants that the family members are constantly employed in the family business for future generations and your next gen don't want it, you've got to make sure that there's the right framework around the family business that then can balance the family influence that the founder would potentially like to have against potentially not having them as employees in the family business. So that's just kind of there on the first point in terms of the process. The second part is, well, use a family business consultant and external advisor to support with drafting. Of course, I'm going to say that, but no, that's not the purpose. The purpose is that, you know, often, again, a lot of our projects are that families have tried to do it in-house. There's an in-house trusted advisor that's trying to draft this and put in place a constitution, but then they've roped in other advisors to support them with the facilitation and the implementation. So this is the value of having an external advisor, because it gives family members the opportunity to speak up. You know, we'll treat information sensitively. Our intention isn't to go back and cause a conflict in the family, but to raise key pertinent points. You know, a lot of issues that we have with family business regionally is around next gen employment. How come his son has got a job and my daughter didn't get a job? That's not fair. Now, would a family member potentially raise that within the family communication with the family in-house advisor? Potentially not, but they often comfortable to raise it with an external advisor with the awareness and knowledge would be treated confidentially, and then we can sensitively navigate, you know, the need to put in a family member employment policy. How is this going to be standardized and applied to everyone to prevent such sensitivities being triggered in the future? You know, today it's manageable among brothers and sisters, but tomorrow when we're talking about cousins and second cousins and future generations, inshallah, it's a lot more difficult to contain and manage. So often there's value in having an external advisor, facilitator to ask. And there's difficult questions. I always caveat my questions when I'm working on these projects with, we're not here to cause trouble. We're not here to find problems, but it's important for us to know there are any pain points so we can address those. And as I mentioned, there's on the third point, there's often potential, there's underlying issues that do pop up most of the time. So then it can be handled with sensitivity. It can be navigated through the appropriate forums, and we can sensitively make sure that there's consensus brought. We can clean up kind of the sensitivity that was caused in the past, pack that up. That has happened, but now let's look to the future. We have a policy, we have, etc., etc. So point 4 again is the fact that it's a participative process. I can't stress that enough. It's important that it's an interactive process. So families often tell us, you know, Yasmine, you give us the constitution and give us best practice. Again, this is really cliche, but there isn't a best practice when it comes to families and business. Not disputing that, you know, there's some families that would put in place similar provisions, similar rules around certain topics, but there's no one size fits all when it comes to family businesses. And we have a barometer of family first or business first, which we try and place every family business on. Some families say, actually, you know, the business is there for the family. Whatever the family needs, they want jobs, they can have jobs, they're qualified, they're not. That's their right as a business owning family to have that right. It's a very extreme case and example, but I'm just trying to illustrate the difference. And then you have the business first individuals that on the other side of the barometer that say, no, you know, our family's well-being depends on the business needs to be in a healthy state, we need to make sure that it's meritocratic, the best people are running it, we don't care if the CEO is a family member or not, as long as it's the most qualified person. And then in that vacuum, family business owning family and different individuals can fall in certain places. So it's a key part of the process, and it's a key part of the interaction with the family. You'll also find some family members that, you know, are at the extreme left, the family first, and some at the extreme right, family first. So it's then building that alignment. Can we come to the middle and, you know, let's balance those interests? Okay, family first and the business first, and find a common ground. So that again is just to reiterate that it is a participative process. It's not a template kind of document that we can that I would recommend giving to you or stating that here you go, this is best practice. There's no such thing as best practice when it comes to family constitutions. And then that point, I think when it comes to, we talk about the enforceability, we do have different schools of thought with the family constitution in the sense that, is it an enforceable document? Is it not? Now, we're very grateful to the laws that have been issued recently around the enforceability, which kind of clears up any, you know, grey area on that front. And as Fadi mentioned last week, there is a certain process into registering a family constitution to making it legally enforceable. But if you look at a family constitution as essentially a contract, provided that it's been, you know, debated, it's been a participative process, law of contract can be applied to it in the sense that, you know, we've voluntarily signed up to this. We've been involved in the process. We all agree with this. It's all, we're all happy with the content. It's not something that has come and been, you know, imposed on family members. And if they sign that, then for my purposes, it's effectively a contract. Now, when it talks to legal implementation, I think we need some more precedent for me to kind of say how enforceable it would be in such instances. But if we look at it that it is a contract among the business owning family, we've all signed to it, we've all participated in its getting to the provisions in it, then there's no reason why it shouldn't really be enforceable. But the participative process is key to that part of the enforceability of a contract. That it's not something that, you know, they've just been forced to sign and then they can dispute that we weren't involved in the drafting of this, we weren't involved in the building of the provisions, and I don't really agree with it. So that's on the process and the participative process. So thanks, Mohammed. So this slide's a little bit overwhelming, I'm sure, but essentially this is what content page of a family constitution would look like. We would spend a good few sessions, you know, up to 8 workshops with the family members collectively to determine where we stand on each of these points. So in terms of the process, what we do is meetings individually with all of the family. We build a baseline understanding of where every individual stands, where the family collectively stands in relation to their philosophy around the family business, any pain points that we would need to address. And then we'd have workshops with the family collectively, or a dedicated working group. I mean, we've worked with some families with over 100 individuals. I can't say it's practical to hold a session with all of them, hold workshops with all of them, but we do have a working group that's representative of the wider family, different generations, the different branches. There's a voice there's a representative that is the voice of basically everyone in somehow, some form. But then once this process is complete, we would collectively meet with the family, the 117 individuals, and present kind of what we've got to, what the provisions are, and what the constitution entails. So I'm going to go through for the rest of this session, half an hour that we've got left today, talking about the different sections and the different provisions and the value that covering would bring to the family business. So firstly, family values. Again, I know, very fuzzy, very not corporate, very not businessy, but it's key behind any family. Defining the family business, the family values and what the family stands for. Why are we in business together? Why do we want to stay together? How is it that we plan to use our wealth? What is our legacy to pass on to successive generations? Often, wealth is a key factor, but wealth is a means to the end in many cases for the family. So it's important to define everything around what that wealth means and what they want to do with that wealth. And then, nothing in life comes for free. So what is expected from family members in the future in return for enjoying the resources and support of the family? Our code of conduct, how we expected to conduct ourselves with the family, with the business, with wider stakeholders. We were just having a discussion offline with the team at PI, and we were talking about family values and Sharia principles. So, it sounds far fuzzy, but we did have a case with a family where, they were very Sharia compliant, and for them, their values were in line with Sharia. And then, you have to dig a little bit deeper. So what does that mean to be a good Muslim, Sharia compliant? It's not just a case, of the transfer of shares to the next generation. A key pain point is often the girls get half the boys, but it doesn't stop there. It's about, family business ethos. It's about our investment decisions. And the key questions for these families were, what happens if, family members don't marry Muslims? What happens if the next gen aren't Muslim? Are we allowed to invest in non-Sharia compliant, non-Sharia activities? Are we going to do business with non-Sharia businesses? Are we going to invest in non-Sharia compliant funds? Are we going to do banking with non-Sharia compliant banks? So that Sharia compliant value of we are good Muslims does actually infiltrate much deeper into their business and operations. And it's important that, it's ironed out. What does it mean for the family? And then building the alignment, because for one family, they were like, yeah, well, you're on the ground in the Gulf. For us, we're less Sharia strict. We're living here in the US, and it's not a thing. So there was a big gap between the expectations and the alignment of the family members, which had to be navigated around. It was a contentious point. So as fluffy as family values sound, just to let you know that it's not necessarily that fluffy. The family mission and vision. Again, this is more for the family and the business, in the sense that what is it that we're working towards? Do we want this family business to be purely family owned? Is it going to be owned by the family members of X family for the next 50 generations? Or is it potential that, we can list it, we can bring in external investors, or won't be majority family owned? Again, it's important to have these conversations now from a family perspective, not only a family perspective, but a business perspective, because, if the intention is to go public in 10 to 15 years, or to bring in external investors, that brings another layer of governance, another layer of business processes and optimization, etc., which is another topic in its own right, around what the family needs to be doing. Because again, that alignment is, Are we building it for future generations? Are we going to be looking at, you know, a trust structure, a foundation structure that ensures that it remains in the hands of the next generation? Or are we going to wait, you know, in 10 years? Then the trust structure, etc., is just has zero value. So key questions that would be addressed on the family mission and vision there as well. I've already touched on the ownership structure in terms of, you know, trust potential in the future, but here it's key on separating ownership from management. Often, particularly with current generations, there's an overlap in terms of management and ownership. Decisions are made, various meetings, but do we specifically hold a shareholders meeting? Do we specifically have board meetings? Do we specifically have ExCom meetings to make those decisions? No. Today it's fine because it just so happens, you know, that the CEO potentially is the patriarch, potentially the son of. I know I'm being very general in terms of the examples given, but I'm just trying to kind of shed light on the way we view things. So it just so happens, you know, it's the patriarch, he's the owner of the wealth, or his son, and he's protected by, you know, the patriarch and the father. But in future, there'll be questions around who's making these decisions, who's determining our strategy as a business. As shareholders, we do have rights, responsibilities, rights to receive information, receive reports on what's happening with the business, receive, you know, a business plan, financials, the direction of the business, rights to receive dividends. And then we also have obligations in that there's certain, if we're just even going to default to law, certain reserve matters that shareholders need to be consulted on to take decisions on. Again, it's not necessarily that they're activated today because, you know, often the patriarch or the next gen are heavily involved. But as the business passes to next generations, it's important that those barriers are built in between the relevant forums and the decisions are taken at the right level, with the right consultation, with the right communication. So under the ownership structure, we'll look at the separation of ownership and management, but then also ownership succession. A key question as the business passes down to generations is that the number of shareholders is going to increase. So, you know, current generation could be 1 or 2 owners. The next generation, you can multiply that, there may be 5, 6, 7 sons, daughters, 7 children. But then when you come to the third generation, each of those 7 children have had just 3 families, 3 children. That's 21 shareholders that need to be managed and communicated with. So we look at different models in terms of how can we contain certain branches, how can we ensure representation of all the family shareholders appropriately, but without complicating or over-influence at the level of the shareholders' assembly. Again, building the communication between the business and the owners. What reports can family shareholders expect to receive? What information can they expect to receive? You know, dividends, what can we expect to receive towards the end of the year? Are we going to withhold dividends this year because we've invested in a massive opportunity in Saudi Arabia? These are things that are material to the shareholders, and it's important to manage their expectations on that front. Done a bit on the governance of the shareholders' assembly, but again, that's how we're going to meet, how we're going to prevent interference. You know, shareholders have certain rights and responsibilities, but it doesn't mean that because you're a shareholder, you can come to the office and you are entitled to your own office space, and you're entitled to go and speak to, you know, the employees of the business and ask them what's going on, what's happening, update me. So defining those lines. The family branch assemblies, point 5, is the tool that I mentioned in terms of how do we manage larger groups of stakeholders in the future, large groups of shareholders. Can we institute governance at the branch level? So, for example, at the second generation, let's have 7 branches where there's 7 next gens, as opposed, and then contain those branches as opposed to then growing to 21 shareholders and then 21 times 3, 63 in the future when it comes to the fourth generation. So how do we contain that, ensure that people are communicated with, they're given their rights and responsibilities, and there's alignment on that front. Board composition, family representation on the board. Again, it's very important to define the different roles. True, you might wear several fat hats as a family member in a family business. You could be, you could be the CEO, you could be a manager of a certain division. You could just be on the board. But defining those hats and then defining the decision-making platforms and what decision-making authorities are brought to the board. The board is a separate platform. It's not the same as a shareholders assembly. It's often confused that the board of directors should be representative of the shareholders assembly. That's not the purpose of a board of directors. The purpose of the board of directors is to ensure that you've got the right people overseeing the management of the group, and you've got the right people asking the right questions. Just by virtue of being a shareholder, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're the best person to manage the business or support the business. An example that I like to use is, a family is looking to expand in the Saudi market, but we operate solely in the UAE, and that's where we've operated for the past 80 years. Now, that's where on the board of directors you can potentially bring somebody who's supported another business and with entry into the KSA market. They've previously navigated the pitfalls, they've navigated the terrain, they know the pain points, know what you've got to do. So it shortens the business's learning curve, and then you've got subject matter experts on that. So board composition, we talk about bringing independent members on the board. We'll often have boards that are family members only. We're getting there in the sense that some family businesses, we're starting as a region to invite non-family members and independent members. But again, it's a case of building trust and valuing an outsider's perspective, because once you invite them to a board, they have a say, they have a voting voice, they have the same voting right as any other any other board member on the board, be it a family member or a non-family member. So again, it's opening the forum for that progress. It might be the case that we're not quite ready to invite external outsiders. We've operated very close, we've managed as a family alone. But in terms of the family's thinking, we put in a timeline potentially, it's not the right time, but maybe in 2 terms' time, say 6 years, we should consider inviting at least one independent member. And we put in, the mechanics of that, how we're going to select that independent member, what his role would be, how it would be appointed. A lot more to cover on the board, but in the interest of time, I will move on. Family member employment policy. This is a very tricky one. And what is the criteria for employing family members in the business? This is, as I mentioned earlier, a key point for concern in many family businesses. Oh, why is my son not been invited? Why is his son doing it? Why is her daughter invited? Oh, my daughter's much younger, so she's not going to get a chance to work in the business. This is where we need to create certainty, processes, and we need to make it systematic so that we take out family influence to avoid any family sensitivities in the future. Who decides are we going to employ the children of the second generation? Now, it's hard if the decision is then taken by the uncle who has decided that, my niece isn't qualified to fulfill that role. No matter how objective, how impartial the uncle has been in making that decision, the fact would still remain that, why would my uncle do that? It was personal. So what we try to do is make sure there's objectivity, there's a process, and there's rules. So before you can think of applying to the business, you need to meet certain criteria. Then, we're not going to create a job for you. If there's a job opening, you're more than welcome to join and apply via the normal route. And then your application will be managed by an external committee with the independent HR consultant, what have you. We build it around kind of the family's needs on that front. And then it's important not only for their entry, but for retaining them in the business. You know, how do we ensure their growth? Is this family member suited to be the next CEO? Are we giving them the right training? Are we giving them the right opportunities? Are they being fairly evaluated when it comes to the annual appraisals? You know, is you know, his senior, who is a non-family member, going to really be honest and impartial when evaluating the son of? So it's just kind of bringing those sensitivities to life and just navigating them. They exist. We can't take them away, but we can build the right framework around it to ensure that it doesn't impact family relationships to the greatest extent possible, but also doesn't affect the operation of the business. Dividend policy, key one. Everyone always wakes up when it's that one, when we're doing it on the family constitution sessions. But that's important because we need to create alignment. You know, a right of the shareholder is to receive a dividend. You know, money makes the world go round. But what other fair numbers are we going to expect? So how are we going to calculate the dividend? How much is going to go to funding new ventures? How much is going to go towards a contingency fund? How much will go towards, you know, setting up a family office fund, diversifying away from the cash cow family business, operating business? They're all important questions that we would have. And again, alignment with expectations, because, you know, when it comes to the next generation, and they're not so tied to the emotional aspect of the family business. You know, the founder has that emotional tie, they've built it from scratch, that's their baby for all intents and purposes. When you get to third and fourth generations, it's a family business, correct, but it's also a shareholding and an investment for them. So, you know, if I take my share from the family business and go and invest it in a fund with X bank, I'll get 5%. So what if I'm not getting 5% here? Why am I not getting 5%? But what is it that we're doing alternatively? So lots of pertinent questions then I get asked. How are we going to value the business? On that front, very important as well. Rules on exit, a favourite one in terms of the current generation, that nobody's allowed to leave and we shouldn't let the next gen leave. Now it's important that we build the framework to make it as enticing as possible for future generations to maintain, to remain in the family business. But it's important to accommodate, you know, different scenarios. There's different factors, different influences outside the business, outside the family, in the own family member's personal world that would influence a decision like that. So, you know, figuring out why is it that they want to leave, what's causing that decision. Is there a way that we can address your concern without having you exit? But then also, if you do want to exit, how are we going to make it just as sensitive towards the remaining family members and less disruptive to the business? You know, you could have a shareholder that every year decides he wants to sell 1%, 1%, 1%. So we open the doors for exit, and it's the whole process, and it's draining and it's straining as well. So then you put rules and parameters that, you know, if you want to leave, you're more than welcome, but there's a certain minimum threshold you have to dispose of. You're only allowed to, you know, dispose of it twice and then go. And then again, just putting the nuances so it's not a threat. Family members can't, you know, dispute something and then threaten to leave. All built on scenarios that we have seen before in other circumstances. So again, just building around the potential pitfalls that could happen when it comes to family business. The rules on valuation I touched upon, but then if we do want to leave, how's it going to be valued? You know, it's not just going to be a random lowball valuation just because somebody wants to leave. It's got to be a fair valuation based on market rates, but also factoring in family ownership aspect of it, in the sense that it won't be as appealing for external investors to enter into a family-owned business or family-controlled business as a minority. So Is there a discount that would be applied to the valuation? And again, all these factors do differ according to the family perspective and would be accommodated. Dispute resolution. God forbid, we are in dispute, we've got an issue. How do we resolve these conflicts? Ideally, we don't want it to be out in the public domain. So to the greatest extent possible, how can we manage it internally, confidentially, quietly among each other, before we start looking, to arbitration courts, to courts, and have the family at war, because it's not nice for the family, but it's also really detrimental to the business, where a lot of our family businesses regionally are built on a name. They are tied to the legacy of the founder, the name of the founder. So any disrepute to the family name will definitely negatively impact the family business. And that's dangerous, so we try and mitigate against that as much as we can. Then these points 13 onwards are more about the family. So we've addressed the business concerns, we've addressed the family's relationship with the business, but now, in terms of the family's relationship with each other and their interaction with the business as a family. So we talk about family council, how we're going to build our family collegiality, where we're going to address board of family matters, ownership matters that aren't necessarily the forum for it isn't the shareholders assembly, it's not the board of directors, but they still should be spoken about. So we bring it to the family council. And again, we put the forum, the mechanisms around how it operates, who's members, etc. Next generation involvement. Now, I know we've spoken about family employment. This is not related to family employment per se, but it's to support the next gen in their own endeavours. Do we want to set up funds to support next gen in their own pursuits? We've got a next gen member who has this really crazy technology disruption idea. We'd hate for him to go, or her to have to go and get external investors. Why don't they come to the family first, and we could support them in that endeavour? So we could have a fund for that to support them. How can we leverage our existing infrastructure of the family business to support them, and support them in any future endeavours? And again, it's preparing them to become owners. They don't necessarily have to be employed in the business, but eventually they will become owners. So educating them on the role and responsibilities of ownership, your rights as a shareholder, and maybe as a board director, for example. So it's very often a training and education question here, and funds. So are we going to have loans, capital, venture funds to support our next gens? And it's important because as the number of family members grow, it's either the business grows to supplement the dividends and fulfill the requirements of their needs, or they need to start being encouraged to do their own things, as the family business won't necessarily give them a substantial or significant dividend, and they need support in their individual capacities. That being said, ideally, the family business also does continue to grow and continue to meet and serve the needs of the succeeding generations. Family welfare, that's something that we see a lot in the region. Our cousins, our wider families, our uncles might not necessarily be family business owners. We might not necessarily get dividends. They might not be so well off, but we have a duty to look after them. We have a duty to care for them. So how do we put a plan around this if that's something we want to plan for? Family charity, philanthropy, legacy. We all know family businesses in the region are extremely generous, might not be so institutionalized in the sense that, there might not be a specific giving agenda, there might not be a specific giving plan or impact measurement, but I think we're moving towards that in the region. But we can't dispute that significant sums of money are being distributed for charitable purposes by these family businesses. So it's often a really useful tool to support the family as well in institutionalizing their giving. So we have, a foundation in the name of the founder, for example, to continue his or her legacy. But then it's also a nice tool, if I can say that, to bring the family together. So we have a philanthropy committee. We build our plan, an annual plan. How much of our dividends are we going to divert to this committee? What are we focusing on for this year? And often the next gen like to get involved on that. And it's good. It's a great forum for them to build their relationships, get to know each other, learn each other, and then work towards a collective goal. And it's an increasingly big question, particularly when we're talking of impact measurement. It is separate to the CSR of the business. Sometimes families are linking them, and there is value to do that. But it's increasingly becoming important when we're talking about the impact measurement. Family office. I'm not going to go into the nuances and the complicatedness of family offices. A family office can be built how you would need it, how a family would need it. It can have the services, that a family wants, from concierge to private jet bookings to private investment funds, or it could just be, a ticket booking desk. Again, it depends on the family's needs, but it's an important question is, if we all as a collective family think it's something that we need, then it might be worthwhile investing it. We can benefit from the economies of scale. If we want to get health insurance for the family, it's much better if we get it collectively, rather than each family member going and sorting out themselves, etc., etc. So it has that. Big component of family offices today is the estate and tax planning. As family members are getting different passports, investments globally, there's different tax triggers and implications that really need to be proactively managed. And that is being built as an arm of the family office. To support with that. Finally, it's just on the rules of confidentiality and code of conduct. It's as a family, okay, these are what we signed up for. Ideally, we don't want to be going and broadcasting it publicly. No harm in, talking about the pursuit and the role and value of governance, but no need to divulge family secrets per se. And, code of conduct, what is expected of us as a family. Again, a little fuzzy and morally binding, but it's important to address nonetheless. And on that's my 18 points covered. I hope you found it useful. I don't know if you have any questions. I don't know if I can see any questions here. But more than happy to support if there's any questions or queries around the different provisions. But very close to my heart. I understand, the significance of family businesses regionally in their role for job creation. It's not a case of just the Gulf sustainability, but there's plenty of expats here in the region from different parts of the world that are dependent on these family businesses for jobs and future jobs. So their continuity is critical in future generations. So please do feel free. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see that I'm always going on about governance. And yeah, thanks, Ahmed and the initiative for this opportunity. Really appreciate it too.
Thank you to you, Yasmine. It never ceases to amaze me just how many different elements family businesses need to contend with, and I can only imagine just how difficult that is without having a constitution in place. We do have one question in the chat from Abdullah, which is there any study in the market on average? What is the dividend ratio for family businesses?
I can give you a percentage based on my interactions with certain family businesses. I'd rather not do that, but I'll send that to you. But again, it does differ. Some have got a very big expansion plan. Some think that no, we should be really reinvesting in the future. So, you are stewards of this wealth, and go and create your own wealth. It really does depend, but it's a key issue we have in the region in terms of the public availability of data. Sense that even if studies are conducted, people don't participate. So I'm afraid I don't think there's a report or a study that I can direct you to, but I can give you anecdotal kind of numbers based on our interaction with family businesses.
And it's important to say as well that the Pearl Initiative is also constantly trying to do some research into the market to understand family businesses better. So in the future, when we do reach out, we would appreciate the families participating in these studies so that we can share this with the community. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
You're always asking for data and always asking for studies, but no one ever wants to participate.
Well, I think we're moving in the right direction in this region. And thank you so much, Yasmine, for being a part of that today. And thank you for your time, both this session and last week's session. I know that, and I'm sure that our participants have really gained a lot of value. I don't believe there are any more questions in the chat. So with that, oh wait, there is one more question, if you have the time. From a legal perspective, what is the difference between an LLC and a family business?
I'm not sure I've understood. So the family business, the legal form of a family business, it can be, private joint stock company, limited liability company. On a legal front, there's not much. I mean, there's obviously the laws that are imposed. An LLC is a lot less stringent in terms of the law and the involvement of law and legislation, but it can take whatever form. The difference is that it's family owned, majority family owned, family controlled. So depending on the different definition for a family business that you go to, usually the prevailing element is that it's predominantly or majoritively family owned and family controlled by a single family. But then between an LLC and a family business, what we talk about is ownership from the shareholders. So we often would recommend that ownership is not held by an individual, rather by an LLC. And that's really for the purposes of succession, in the sense that if the current generation owner was to pass away, their heirs would inherit the shares in the LLC as opposed to directly in the family business. So that creates operational efficiencies, but also, God forbid, there's any conflicts at that branch LLC level, then they're contained at the LLC. One more question is, have you seen families start to make use of DIFC trust structures? Yes, we're getting there, slowly but surely. I think there's a lot of education to be done around the trusts. I think regionally, the concept of giving up control to a trust is something that needs a lot of work done around it. But particularly for the regional assets, we see trust structures for the assets on the ground, and then there would be a mirror structure for international assets with a trust elsewhere. And yeah, that's it. So if there's any other follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and I'm happy to support. Thanks again, Mohammed. And sorry,
thank you, Yasmine.
I know I've gone over 4 minutes.
It's all value. Thank you so much to EY and to Yasmine, and please do follow Pearl Initiative on all the various channels and stay up to date with what we have coming up next. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.